I showed up to receive my Medal of Honor and the guard said, "You're not fooling anyone, you homeless fake." My stomach dropped as his grip tightened on my bicep, his fingers digging in hard enough to send electric shocks down the arm that was damaged in the army. He said, "Turn around and leave before we have to escort you out." But he didn't know I was the guest of honor they'd been briefed about. I tried to pull out the crumpled invitation from my pocket, but my hands were shaking too badly, not from alcohol withdrawal like he assumed, but from the same tremors that had started the day I pulled 12 men from a burning Humvee. The letter fell to the ground, and the guard, Kevin according to his badge, stepped on it before I could pick it up, grinding it into the marble floor with his heel while maintaining eye contact. The second guard, Dexter, moved behind me to cut off any retreat, while Kevin announced loud enough for the gathering crowd of Gold Star families to hear, "We get these fake veterans all the time trying to sneak into ceremonies for free food and attention." My army jacket from Goodwill was the only thing keeping me warm for 3 months of sleeping rough, and he grabbed the collar, examining it like evidence of a crime. I said, "I'm supposed to be here," but my voice came out wrong, too quiet and raspy from a respiratory infection I couldn't afford to treat, and he laughed like I'd told a joke. "Sure you are, just like you probably tell everyone you're a war hero when you panhandle outside the liquor store." He found the sergeant's stripes that were barely holding on with old thread and ripped them off, letting them fall to the floor. "Stolen valor is a federal crime, you know that?" More guards were gathering now, 4 of them forming a circle around me, while ceremony attendees pressed against the security checkpoint to watch the spectacle. One of them wrinkled his nose and sprayed air freshener directly at my face, the chemicals burning my eyes and throat. "When's the last time you had a shower?" 2 weeks ago at the shelter, but I didn't tell him that because explaining would make it worse. Dexter decided to search me for weapons, which meant emptying my pockets onto the floor while everyone watched. My VA medical card fell out, and he picked it up, bending it back and forth. "These fakes are getting better, but you can always tell by the lamination." The card snapped in half, and he tossed the pieces aside. Kevin pushed me against the wall hard enough that my head bounced off the marble, and I tasted blood from where I'd bitten my tongue. He said, "My brother died in Iraq. Really died. Not whatever fantasy you've created in your drunk mind to justify being a worthless drain on society." I tried to mention my Purple Heart, but that sent Dexter into a rage, his face turning red as he grabbed my throat and squeezed. "You mention that again, and I'll have you arrested for impersonating a veteran." The medication bottles in my pocket rattled when they shoved me, and Kevin pulled them out, reading the labels to the crowd. "Antipsychotics, benzos, enough psych meds to stock a pharmacy. This is why he thinks he's some kind of hero, and not just another crazy homeless guy." They started dragging me toward the exit, and I knew once they threw me out, I'd never make it back in time for the ceremony. The governor would be there, expecting me to walk onto that stage, and instead, there'd be an empty chair and whispers about the Medal of Honor recipient who didn't bother to show up. Kevin forced me to my knees in front of the Gold Star families and said, "This is what disrespect looks like, people who steal the honor of real heroes." My knee hit the marble hard, and I felt something pop, an old injury, but I couldn't cry out because that would just confirm what they thought about me being weak. That's when I saw her, the governor's aide, running toward us with a photo in her hand and panic on her face. She was scanning the crowd, and her eyes locked on mine for a second before moving past, not recognizing me through the dirt and bruises. She asked Kevin, "Have you seen Staff Sergeant Daniel Shamit? He's supposed to receive the Medal of Honor in 10 minutes. Kevin barely glanced at the photo and said, "No, ma'am, but we'll keep an eye out." He tightened his grip on my arm and started pulling me toward the door while she ran off to check other entrances. Dexter said, "Let's get this piece of trash out of here before he embarrasses himself worse," and they lifted me to my feet, my knee screaming in protest. That's when Kevin's phone buzzed and his face went pale as he read the message. He showed it to Dexter, whose grip on my arm suddenly loosened. They both stared at me, then at the phone, then back at me, and I saw my military photo on the screen. Kevin's mouth opened but no words came out, and Dexter took a step back like I might explode. I realized this wasn't over because now they knew who I was, but they'd already done too much to take back. Kevin grabbed my shoulder and leaned in close, his voice different now, desperate, and said, "You're going to tell everyone this was a misunderstanding, or things will get worse for you than sleeping on the streets." His breath smells like coffee, and something sour when he leans in that close, and I can see a tiny muscle jumping in his jaw, like his whole face might crack apart. My throat burns where Dexter's fingers were, and my knee throbs, but I shake my head anyway, slow and deliberate so he knows I mean it. The phone in his hand buzzes again, and his grip on my shoulder tightens hard enough that I feel my damaged arm start to go numb. I meet his eyes and hold them, not backing down even though every survival instinct I developed sleeping rough tells me to just agree and get out. Kevin's face cycles through expressions too fast, Shock bleeding into fear, bleeding into something uglier, and I watch him calculate how badly he's messed up and what it's going to cost him. He opens his mouth like he's going to threaten me again, but I see the governor's aide rushing past in my peripheral vision, still scanning faces in the crowd with that photo clutched in her hand. I force myself to stand straighter despite my knee screaming in protest, pulling away from Kevin's grip enough that he has to either let go or make it obvious he's restraining me. My voice comes out rough and raspy from the respiratory infection and the choking, but I push it loud enough to cut through the lobby noise. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Chamet," I say clearly, and I watch her freeze mid-stride like someone hit pause on a video. Her eyes lock onto mine and widen as recognition finally clicks into place, her professional mask cracking as she takes in my bruised face and torn jacket and the way Kevin's still holding my shoulder. Kevin's grip loosens for just a second, uncertainty flickering across his face, and she spins around so fast her heels squeak on the marble floor. She's pulling out her phone with shaking hands and comparing my face to whatever photo is on her screen, her other hand flying to her mouth as the full picture assembles in her brain. "I've been standing here the whole time," I realize she's thinking, getting assaulted by venue security while she ran around looking for me. She drops the phone into her purse, and her voice comes out sharp with authority when she orders Kevin and Dexter to release me immediately. Kevin lets go and steps back, but his jaw stays clenched tight, and I can see him mentally rehearsing whatever story he's going to tell to save his job. Dexter moves away too, but slower, like he's not quite sure what's happening yet, and I know this isn't over for either of them, even if they're pretending to comply now. The aide is staring at me with horror spreading across her face as she catalogues the damage, the chemical burns on my skin, and the finger-shaped bruises already forming on my throat. I can see her mentally calculating how badly this reflects on the governor's office, how this is going to look when it gets out that the Medal of Honor recipient was assaulted in their lobby. She glances at Kevin, and then back at me, and I watch her professional training kick in as she starts figuring out damage control, while simultaneously realizing she needs to actually help me first. She's apologizing rapidly and reaching for my arm to escort me inside, but I pull away before she can touch me, my body recoiling on instinct after what just happened. My skin crawls at the thought of another stranger's hands on me, and she notices, her hand dropping back to her side as understanding flashes across her face. I tell her I'm not going on stage looking like this, covered in dirt and blood with chemical burns still stinging my eyes and throat. The words come out flat and matter-of-fact, not angry or emotional, just stating reality. She starts to argue about the schedule and the waiting dignitaries, her training pushing her toward protocol, but I cut her off mid-sentence. "I need medical attention first, and I need it documented," I say, making sure she hears both parts of that statement. Her mouth closes and she blinks at me, probably not used to people making demands instead of just going along with what officials tell them to do. I see the moment she makes a decision, her shoulders straightening as she pivots from ceremony coordinator to someone trying to contain a disaster. She makes a quick decision and leads me toward a back hallway, away from the staring Gold Star families who are still pressed against the security checkpoint, watching everything unfold. She's speaking urgently into her phone about getting the venue medic to a private room immediately, her voice low but intense. Kevin and Dexter follow at a distance, no longer touching me, but clearly ordered to stay nearby, and I can feel their eyes boring into my back with every step I take. The aide keeps glancing at me nervously like I might collapse or disappear, or do something else that will make this situation even worse for her carefully planned ceremony. She's walking fast, and I'm limping to keep up, my knee protesting with each step, but I don't ask her to slow down because I want to get away from the crowd and their stares. We pass through a door marked "Staff Only," and the noise from the lobby cuts off suddenly, leaving just the sound of our footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The aide is still on her phone saying things like "serious situation" and "immediate management," and "I need you here now," her professional mask falling apart around the edges. A small office backstage becomes a makeshift medical station when we arrive, just a desk and some chairs and fluorescent lights that hurt my eyes. A tired medic in his 50s arrives within 2 minutes carrying a first aid kit, and he examines my eyes under a portable light that makes me want to flinch away. His expression darkens as he documents chemical irritation and burst blood vessels, writing notes on a clipboard in careful handwriting. He moves to my throat next, and I have to force myself to stay still while he touches the bruising, his fingers gentle, but it still hurts. "Bruising consistent with choking," he says out loud while writing it down, and the aide shifts uncomfortably in the doorway. He tests my knee's range of motion and notes the swelling, asking gentle questions about my respiratory infection that I answer in a raspy voice. The aide hovers in the doorway, making more phone calls, and I hear her telling someone that we have a serious situation that needs immediate management, her voice tight with stress. The medic keeps working methodically, photographing each injury from multiple angles, and I'm grateful he's treating this like evidence instead of just patching me up and sending me out. A man in an expensive suit arrives within 15 minutes, moving fast through the door like he owns the building. He introduces himself as the governor's chief of staff and immediately starts talking about getting me cleaned up and back on schedule, his voice smooth and practiced. I interrupt him mid-sentence and say, I'm not performing for cameras until someone takes responsibility for what just happened to me in their lobby. His smile tightens at the corners, and he exchanges a look with the aide, some kind of silent communication passing between them. He pivots smoothly to damage control mode, assuring me there will be a full investigation while gently suggesting we focus on the ceremony first. His tone implies I should be reasonable, that we can deal with the unpleasant stuff later after the important public event. I shake my head, and he blinks at me like he's not used to people refusing his suggestions. I bend down slowly, my knee protesting with sharp pain, and pick up the pieces of my trampled invitation and snapped VA card from where they fell during the assault. I've been carrying them in my pocket this whole time, evidence of what Kevin and Dexter did to me in front of witnesses. I hold them up so the chief of staff can see the evidence clearly, the broken plastic and crumpled paper. I tell him I need both items replaced, and I need written documentation that I was the scheduled guest of honor, not some homeless faker trying to crash the event. The medic quietly photographs the broken card and crumpled invitation, while the chief of staff's jaw works silently, clearly unused to people making demands of his office. He looks at the aide again, and she nods slightly, confirming that yes, this actually happened, and yes, we need to fix it. The chief of staff's smooth expression cracks just slightly, and I see calculation behind his eyes as he figures out how to handle someone who won't just accept apologies and move on. The chief of staff offers what he probably thinks is a generous compromise, saying the governor would be happy to meet me privately backstage for a handshake and photo before I leave. His tone suggests this should satisfy me, that private access to the governor is valuable currency I should appreciate. I look at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch uncomfortable, and then say, no, I'm not interested in private photo ops that let everyone pretend this didn't happen publicly, I tell him, keeping my voice flat and unemotional. His professional mask slips for just a second, and I see real frustration flash across his face before he recovers. He says he'll see what he can arrange, the words careful and non-committal, and I know he's already planning how to minimize damage while giving me as little as possible. The aide is watching this exchange with growing concern, probably realizing that I'm not going to make this easy for anyone. The security supervisor appears in the doorway, a woman in her 40s with nervous energy radiating off her like heat. She promises a thorough internal review of the incident, her words coming out fast and rehearsed. She won't meet my eyes when she talks, directing most of her words to the chief of staff instead, and I realize she's more worried about liability than what actually happened to me. Her hands flutter as she talks, gesturing vaguely about protocols and procedures and comprehensive investigations. I ask her directly if Kevin and Dexter are still on duty, and she hesitates, glancing at the chief of staff for permission before answering. She admits they've been temporarily reassigned away from the ceremony venue, her voice dropping on the word temporarily, like she hopes I won't notice. I notice, and I file it away, as another thing that's not actually resolved, just moved out of sight. The aide walks back to the table and sits down across from me, pulling a business card from her jacket pocket and sliding it across the surface. She leans forward slightly, and her voice drops to almost a whisper as she suggests I might want to visit an emergency room for better documentation of what happened. She adds that I should feel free to circle back with her office about rescheduling the ceremony part if I want to, but her tone makes it clear she's giving me an out rather than pushing me toward anything. I pick up the card and slip it into my pocket next to the broken pieces of my VA card, and something clicks in my head about how she's the only person in this room who seems to get that I have choices here. I'm not required to make this easy for them, or smile for cameras, or pretend everything's fine just because they're offering apologies now. I push back from the table slowly, testing my weight on my bad knee, and feel it throb, but hold. I look at the chief of staff and the security supervisor and tell them clearly that I'm leaving before the ceremony starts, because taking care of myself matters more than any medal presentation. The chief of staff's mouth opens like he's going to argue, but the aide reaches over and puts her hand on his arm, shaking her head just slightly. I catch her leaning toward him and whispering something that looks like advice about not making this situation worse than it already is. I turn toward the door and walk out through the back exit without looking back at any of them, pushing through the heavy door into afternoon sunlight that makes my chemical-burned eyes water. I leave behind the stage they set up and the dignitaries waiting in the main hall and the carefully planned ceremony that was supposed to honor me, choosing my own dignity over their need to control how this looks to everyone watching. The urgent care clinic sits 3 blocks away, and I walk there slowly, my knee complaining with each step, but my head clearing slightly in the cold air. I push through the glass doors and tell the woman at the front desk that I was assaulted and need documentation, and she takes one look at my face and waves me back immediately without making me wait. A young clinician with kind eyes and careful hands brings me into an exam room and pulls out a camera, explaining she needs to photograph every visible injury in detail. She moves around me slowly, capturing the chemical burns across my face where the air freshener hit me, the dark fingerprint bruises on my throat from where Dexter squeezed, the swelling in my knee that's getting worse now that I'm off my feet. She notices the older scars on my damaged arm and asks gentle questions about what happened today, and I give her the short version without going into every humiliating detail. I watch her face harden with anger on my behalf as I talk, her jaw setting in a way that tells me she believes every word without needing proof. Something tight in my chest loosens just slightly at being believed without question, at having someone document what was done to me like it matters. She prints out the photos and puts them in a folder with my name on it, handing me copies along with treatment instructions for the chemical burns. I make it back to the temporary hotel room the VA social worker helped me get last month, a small space with a bed and a bathroom that's mine until the voucher runs out. I sit on the edge of the bed and pull out my phone with hands that won't stop shaking, opening my messages and attaching the medical photos one by one. I type out a simple request to the aide asking for written confirmation that I was the scheduled guest of honor at today's ceremony, not some homeless faker trying to crash an event. My hands shake worse as I type, and I have to retype several words, not from withdrawal like Kevin assumed, but from adrenaline finally crashing after hours of forcing myself to hold together. I hit send, and then just sit there staring at nothing, my body remembering things I don't want to think about. The Humvee fire comes back in flashes, the way my hands shook exactly like this after I pulled the 12th man out and realized there was no one else left to save. I force myself to breathe slowly and count to 10 over and over until the shaking eases slightly. Then I lie down fully clothed and stare at the ceiling until exhaustion pulls me under. My phone rings at 8 the next morning, and I see an unknown number with a corporate extension that makes my gut tighten immediately. I answer, and a smooth male voice introduces himself as Demetrius Patton, regional manager for the security company that employs Kevin and Dexter. He offers his sincere apologies for what happened and suggests we should meet to discuss resolution, his tone professional and carefully neutral. He mentions a non-disclosure agreement almost casually, like it's just a standard part of how these situations get handled, and I feel my jaw clench as I realize exactly what he's doing. They want to buy my silence before this gets any bigger, throw some money at me and make me sign papers promising I'll never talk about what their guards did. I tell him I need to think about it and hang up before he can push harder, my hands starting to shake again as anger mixes with the morning tremors I can never quite control. An hour later, a message request pops up on social media from someone named Sam Cartwright, who identifies herself as a local reporter. She says she heard about a problem at yesterday's ceremony and wants to hear my side of the story off the record first. No pressure to go public if I'm not comfortable. I stare at the message for 10 full minutes, weighing what it would mean to let this become news against the chance that someone might actually care what happened to me. I finally type back that I'll think about her offer, keeping my response short and non-committal. She replies almost immediately saying she'll wait for my decision and includes her direct phone number with a note that there's no pressure either way. I'm surprised by the respect in that approach, the way she's giving me control instead of pushing for a story, and I save her number in my contacts without deciding anything yet. Nathaniel Goff from the VA calls in the afternoon while I'm trying to figure out how to get my medications refilled without the card Dexter broke. He asks if I need help replacing my destroyed medical card and getting my prescriptions sorted out since the bottles were taken during the assault. His voice is patient and matter-of-fact in a way that makes me trust he's done this before, that he knows how to navigate the systems I can barely think straight enough to deal with right now. He offers to meet me at a coffee shop near the VA clinic tomorrow to handle the paperwork, and I agree immediately, feeling a small measure of relief that at least one thing might work in my favor. He mentions bringing all the forms I'll need and says not to worry about the process, that he'll walk me through each step, and I hang up feeling slightly less alone in dealing with all of this. I spend the evening filing an online complaint with the ceremony venue, typing out what happened in careful detail, and attaching the medical photos the urgent care gave me. Then I drive to the police station and ask to file an assault report, my hands still shaking as I fill out forms describing Kevin's chokehold and Dexter's chemical spray attack. The officer taking my report is professional enough, asking the right questions and typing up my statement, but I can see doubt in his eyes when he looks at my Goodwill jacket and unwashed hair. He makes a point of noting that charges would be difficult to prove given the circumstances, his tone suggesting I shouldn't get my hopes up about criminal prosecution. I take the case number anyway, and leave feeling like I've at least planted a flag, put something official on record, even if nothing comes of it. The security company releases a public statement the next morning, and I read it on my phone while drinking bad coffee in my hotel room. They describe a disruption at a state event, and their swift response to ensure attendee safety, completely flipping what actually happened into something that makes me sound like the threat they had to neutralize. I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass, the careful corporate language designed to protect them while making me disappear. Sam Cartwright texts me, asking if I've seen the statement and whether I'm ready to talk now, and I stare at my phone, realizing that staying silent means letting their version become the official truth. I text back saying yes, I'm ready to tell my side, and she responds that she'll call me this afternoon to go over everything. Nathaniel meets me at a quiet coffee shop tucked into a strip mall near the VA clinic, and we sit in a back corner away from other customers. He slides VA card replacement forms across the table one at a time, pointing to each signature line with patient efficiency, while my hands shake too badly to hold the pen steady. He doesn't comment on the tremors or the bruises still visible on my throat, just waits calmly while I manage to scrawl my name on each form. He mentions there's a clinic slot available this afternoon if I want to get my medications sorted out right away, and I accept gratefully, relieved that someone is helping me navigate systems I can barely focus on. We finish the paperwork, and he walks me over to the clinic, introducing me to the pharmacist and making sure they have everything they need to refill my prescriptions without the broken card as proof. The pharmacist hands me a paper bag with my refilled medications, and I walk back to the hotel room feeling steadier than I have in days, the simple act of having my prescriptions sorted, giving me something concrete to hold on to. My phone rings that evening while I'm organizing the pill bottles by day and time, and Sam's name appears on the screen with a number I don't recognize, but somehow know is hers. She starts talking before I can say hello, her voice tight and angry as she explains she spent the afternoon verifying every detail of the ceremony program and found my name listed clearly as the guest of honor they were supposed to be celebrating. She asks if I'm willing to let her use the medical photos from urgent care in her article, explaining carefully that the images would help people understand what actually happened to me in that lobby. I sit on the edge of the bed staring at the pill bottles while considering her request, my brain running through all the ways this could go wrong versus all the ways staying silent lets them win. I tell her yes after a long pause, trusting something in her voice that sounds like she wants truth rather than just a good story, and she thanks me quietly before ending the call. My phone starts buzzing the next morning before I'm fully awake, text messages from numbers I don't recognize filling the screen with words that make my hands shake worse. The messages call me a stolen valor fake and tell me real heroes don't cry assault when security does their job, using the same exact language Kevin used when he had his hand around my throat. I screenshot each message with trembling fingers and forward them to Sam and to the police case number, building a file even though I know tracking down anonymous texts is basically impossible. The walls start closing in around mid-morning, and my brain screams at me to just take an extra anxiety pill and make the shaking stop, to self-medicate away the fear and anger until I can't feel anything anymore. Instead, I force myself to stand up and walk to the VA clinic for the appointment Nathaniel set up, each step sending pain through my injured knee, but clearing my head slightly in the cold morning air. The doctor refills my prescriptions without asking questions about why I need them or making me prove I'm not just drug-seeking, and she gives me a new inhaler for the respiratory infection that's been making me cough blood. I leave the clinic feeling like I barely won a fight against my own worst habits, the urge to self-destruct still there but manageable for now. The aide emails me that afternoon with formal letterhead from the governor's office, confirming I was the scheduled Medal of Honor ceremony honoree, and I can see she's copied what looks like the legal team on the message. The language is careful and official, but it's there in black and white, proof that I wasn't lying or confused or trying to crash some event I had no business attending. I save 3 copies in different places on my phone and computer and feel something tight in my chest loosen just a little bit, like maybe I'm not crazy for thinking I deserved better treatment. Demetrius calls again the next day, offering a private settlement check and mandatory security training for his staff if I'll just sign a big non-disclosure agreement that stops me from discussing the incident with anyone. His tone is friendly and smooth, but I can hear the math underneath it, the assumption that homeless veterans can be bought off quietly before this becomes a real problem for his company. I tell him I need time to think about his offer and hang up feeling sick to my stomach, knowing that taking his money means letting them hide what they did to me and probably to others. A lawyer named Elliot Chamberlain leaves a voicemail the same afternoon saying he saw some news coverage starting to emerge and he'd be willing to represent me without charging anything if I want to pursue legal action. His voice sounds calm and professional without talking down to me, and he mentions he's handled cases like this before, involving discrimination and security guards using too much force. I call him back after spending an hour debating with myself and agree to meet him, figuring I've got nothing to lose by at least hearing what my actual options might be. Elliot's office turns out to be surprisingly small and plain for a lawyer, just a desk and some filing cabinets in a building that's seen better days, and he spends our first meeting asking careful questions about what happened while taking notes. He explains he'll file official requests for the security camera footage and any internal communications between staff members, building up a factual foundation before we decide what to do next. I appreciate that he's not promising me millions of dollars or guaranteed justice, just steady work toward making someone accountable, and I sign the papers that make him my lawyer, feeling like maybe I found someone who gets how systems actually work. Sam's first article comes out 3 days after our initial phone conversation, laying out the whole timeline of my scheduled ceremony appearance and the documented assault by venue security in clear, simple language. Listen to 90 seconds and rate me 5 stars on Spotify. Doing a giveaway for people who did this and show proof on my Instagram. There will be 4 winners, and you get to choose between a Spotify or Amazon gift card. She includes quotes from the urgent care doctor about my injuries and mentions the security company's public statement that made me sound like the dangerous one without adding her own opinion. The comments section fills up fast with people split right down the middle between supporting me and insisting I must have done something to deserve getting thrown out, and I stop reading after the first dozen because my hands start shaking again. A woman named Abigail contacts me through Sam explaining she's a Gold Star mother who was at the ceremony and saw Kevin force me to my knees in front of everyone. Her message sounds torn up and sorry, saying she didn't realize what was really happening until she read Sam's article, and now she can't stop thinking about how she just stood there watching. I write back carefully thanking her for reaching out, and she offers to give a witness statement if it would help my case, her guilt turning into something more useful than just feeling bad. Elliot calls with advice to turn down any settlement offers that come with non-disclosure agreements attached, explaining our goal should be actual policy changes plus reasonable money rather than a quick payout that lets the company sweep everything under the rug. He's already found patterns in how the security company profiles people based on whether they look homeless, and he thinks we can push for real reforms that might help the next veteran who shows up somewhere looking rough. I agree right away, realizing I care way more about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else than I do about getting paid off to stay quiet. Nathaniel calls me 2 days later and explains he's putting my case forward for an emergency housing voucher through the VA system, his voice steady as he walks me through what to expect. He says the wait list usually takes months, but he's flagged my file as urgent because of the assault and my medical records showing I need stable housing to manage my conditions properly. I listen to him lay out the timeline and catch myself wanting to believe this might actually work before pushing that feeling back down, where it can't hurt me when it falls through. He's not making promises or acting like this is guaranteed, just explaining the steps he's taking and what comes next, and I respect that more than false hope. I tell him I appreciate what he's doing, and he responds that it's his job, but I can hear in his tone that he actually cares about getting this right. The call ends with him saying he'll update me when he hears anything, and I sit in the temporary hotel room staring at my phone, feeling like maybe someone is actually working the system for me instead of against me. Sam's second article publishes exactly 1 week after her first piece, and this time she's gotten hold of something that makes my hands shake when I read it on my phone. The security company used an actual written checklist to profile people, and she's printed the whole thing in the article with a source inside the company who leaked it to her. The list includes things like unwashed clothing, slow movement, visible tremors, carrying bags and avoiding eye contact, basically a how-to guide for targeting homeless people and treating them like threats. Seeing it written out in official company language makes my stomach turn because it's exactly what I suspected, but somehow worse when it's right there in black and white as actual policy. She included my medical photos in this article with my permission, the ones showing the chemical burns on my face and the bruises on my throat, and the comments section looks different this time. People are less split now, more focused on being angry at the security company than debating whether I deserved what happened, and I read through maybe 20 comments before closing the browser because my chest feels tight. I text Sam thanking her for the work she's doing, and she responds immediately saying, She's got more sources reaching out now that the first article created space for people to talk. Abigail sends me a long message through the contact info Sam gave her, and I read it twice, trying to process the level of honesty she's putting out there. She explains her son died in Afghanistan 3 years ago, and she's been living in this fog of grief ever since, going to military events, and feeling suspicious of anyone who looked out of place or didn't fit her idea of what a veteran should be. She says watching what happened to me at the ceremony cracked something open inside her, made her realize she's been carrying her son's death as anger at the wrong people instead of dealing with the actual loss. I sit with that message for a long time, not knowing what to say, because that kind of raw truth deserves more than a quick response. Finally, I write back telling her, I understand that grief makes people do strange things, and I don't hold it against her that she didn't intervene. And she responds within minutes, saying she's already submitted a witness statement to Elliot, confirming she saw Dexter choke me and Kevin force me to my knees. The practical help matters more than the apology, and I tell her that, and she sends back a simple thank you that feels genuine. The state government opens an official inquiry 2 weeks after everything happened, and the aide emails me requesting a formal written statement about what happened at the ceremony. I forward the email to Elliot right away, and he calls within an hour to walk me through what this means. He explains it's separate from any civil case we might file, an internal process the state runs to figure out if their venue policies need changing and whether anyone should face consequences. He says it could lead to real policy reforms even if we never sue anyone, so it's worth taking seriously and doing right. I spend that whole afternoon sitting at the small desk in my hotel room, drafting my account of what happened, trying to keep my language careful and factual without letting emotion creep in. I write about Kevin grabbing my arm, Dexter choking me, the chemical spray in my face, being forced to my knees, all of it in simple chronological order with specific details about what they said and did. Elliot told me to stick to facts and timeline without talking about how it felt or what I think it means, trusting that the events will speak for themselves if I just lay them out clearly. I read through my statement 3 times before sending it to Elliot, checking every detail to make sure it's accurate and matches what I can prove, because I know they'll look for any tiny inconsistency to use against me. The timeline has to be exact, the sequence of events has to make sense, and I can't include anything I'm not completely sure about, because one wrong detail could discredit everything else. Elliot gets back to me the next morning with a few small suggestions about clarifying the timing of certain moments and making the sequence clearer, but he says the core account is solid and lines up with all the medical records. He asks if I'm ready to submit it through official channels, and I say yes, then spend 10 minutes staring at the send button before finally clicking it. The confirmation email arrives immediately, and I feel like I've done everything possible to make my voice heard through the proper processes, even though I know the system doesn't always work the way it should. Elliot's records request comes back with something that makes me feel sick all over again when he forwards it to me. The security company had an internal memo from the ceremony day that labeled me as a possible intoxicated loiterer based purely on how I looked and moved, written before Kevin ever put his hands on me. Reading those exact words in official company communication feels like being turned into a checklist item instead of a person, like they looked at my tremors and my slow walk and my unwashed clothes and ran me through their threat assessment system. The memo specifically mentions my appearance and movement patterns as red flags, reducing everything about my actual medical conditions and combat injuries to security concerns. Elliot calls after I've had time to read it and explains this document makes our case much stronger because it proves the profiling wasn't just Kevin making a bad individual choice, but the whole company system working exactly as designed. He sounds energized in a professional way, talking about how this shows systematic discrimination rather than isolated misconduct, and I just feel tired and dehumanized reading my existence described as a security problem. Nathaniel calls with news I wasn't expecting, his voice carrying actual excitement as he tells me he's secured a short-term hotel voucher for me while the longer housing application works its way through the system. He explains it'll get me out of the temporary shelter rotation where I never know if I'll have a bed from night to night, giving me a stable place to stay for at least the next month. I check into the new room that same afternoon, a small space on the edge of town in a building that's seen better days, but feels quiet and private. The furniture is worn and the carpet has stains, but none of that matters when I turn the lock and realize I'm the only person with a key to this door. Nobody can grab me here. Nobody can question whether I belong here. Nobody can spray chemicals in my face or choke me or force me to my knees, and that thought breaks something loose in my chest that's been locked tight since the assault. I sit on the edge of the bed and cry for the first time since everything happened. Not sad crying, but the kind that comes from finally having a space that's mine, even if it's temporary. Sam contacts me about getting Abigail's witness statement for her reporting, explaining that having an outside person confirm what happened adds weight to the story in ways my own account can't. Abigail's statement describes the chokehold and Kevin forcing me to my knees while announcing to everyone that I was a fake veteran. All the details I included in my own version, but coming from someone who had no reason to lie or exaggerate. Her account includes things I didn't mention in my statement because I was too focused on what was happening to me, like how other Gold Star families in the crowd looked uncomfortable, but nobody stepped in to stop it. She describes the whole scene from an outside perspective, and it matches everything I said, giving my version the kind of backup that makes it harder to dismiss as one person's biased memory. The validation of having someone else confirm what happened settles something in my chest that's been tight and anxious since I first tried to explain this to people, knowing that I'm not the only one who saw what really occurred. Demetrius calls again, and his tone has shifted from the smooth corporate voice to something more careful as he proposes bringing both sides together for a formal mediation session. He talks around any admission that his company did anything wrong, using phrases like finding common ground and mutual understanding, while suggesting we might resolve this without further conflict. I tell him I need to talk to my lawyer, and he agrees immediately, probably hoping Elliot will push me toward a quick settlement. Elliot calls me back within an hour of me forwarding Demetrius's message and walks me through what mediation could accomplish if we use it right. He says it's a chance to see whether the company is willing to make real policy changes or just wants to throw money at the problem until I go away quietly. I agree to one mediation session with the clear understanding that we're not obligated to settle for anything less than actual reform, curious to see if they're capable of genuine accountability or just better damage control than their first public statement. The governor's office reaches out through the aide with a new proposal, this time suggesting a private rescheduled ceremony where they'd acknowledge what happened if I'm willing to accept joint language about mutual regret over how the situation played out. I read through their suggested statement and feel my jaw clench at the both sides framing that makes it sound like everyone shares equal blame for what happened. The language talks about unfortunate misunderstandings and regrettable circumstances, carefully avoiding any mention of who actually grabbed who, or who actually choked who, or who actually forced who to their knees. Elliot confirms I'm under no obligation to accept their face-saving language when I forward him the proposal, and I draft a polite response declining their offer. I explain clearly that I'm not interested in mutual regret when only one side committed assault, and only one side has anything to actually regret, and I send it before I can second-guess whether being direct will hurt my case somehow. The detective calls 2 days later while I'm eating cereal in my hotel room, and his voice sounds tired before he even starts explaining. He walks me through why criminal charges probably won't happen, talking about intent being hard to prove, and the security company arguing their guards thought they were protecting people. I listen to him explain how these cases usually go, and I'm not surprised because I've learned how systems work when homeless veterans try to hold people accountable. He says my civil case with Elliot has better chances of getting something real, and I thank him for being honest instead of giving me false hope. I hang up and finish my cereal, even though it's gotten soggy, my hands shaking slightly, but not as bad as they used to. The VA therapy intake happens 3 days after that, and I sit in a small office across from Nadia, who has kind eyes and doesn't look at me like I'm broken. She asks questions about my combat experience in a gentle way that doesn't feel like an interrogation, and I find myself actually answering instead of shutting down. I tell her about pulling 12 men from the burning Humvee, and my hands start shaking worse as I describe the smell of fuel mixing with burning flesh. She watches my tremors without flinching or trying to make me stop, and just nods when I explain how the shaking started that day and never really went away. She talks about grounding techniques we can work on to help manage the physical responses, and I leave her office feeling like maybe therapy won't be a total waste of time, like I'd assumed. Elliot calls me the morning of the mediation to go over our strategy one more time and reminds me not to react to whatever lowball offer they start with. We meet in the lobby of a corporate building downtown and ride the elevator up to a conference room that smells like new carpet and air freshener. Demetrius sits on one side of the long table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, and Elliot and I take seats across from them with a neutral mediator at the head, trying to look impartial. The company lawyers open with an offer that's insulting, a small cash payment, and a sweeping NDA that would stop me from ever talking about what happened or their policies. I look at Elliot and shake my head before they finish their presentation because I'm not interested in being bought off quietly. Elliot stays calm and professional as he explains we're not here for silence money. We want real policy changes that might help the next veteran who shows up somewhere looking homeless. The The mediator asks Elliot to present our demands, and he lays them out in clear, simple terms that don't leave room for confusion. He says, we want mandatory training for all security staff about trauma and how to interact with veterans without profiling them based on appearance. He explains, we need the profiling checklist completely rewritten to remove the parts about targeting people who look homeless. He adds that we want a formal apology to the broader veterans community, not just a private sorry to me that no one else will ever hear. The company lawyers exchange looks across the table, and Demetrius shifts in his chair like he's uncomfortable, probably not expecting a homeless veteran to care more about systemic change than personal money. The mediator calls for a 15-minute break, and I step outside into the hallway feeling energized by finally making concrete demands instead of just defending myself. We go back in after the break, and the company has a counteroffer ready that falls way short of what we asked for. They propose a limited apology letter that would only go to me and some vague promises about reviewing their training protocols without committing to specific changes. I counter immediately that I want public acknowledgement of what their guards actually did wrong and specific policy commitments with someone outside the company checking to make sure they follow through. Demetrius looks genuinely frustrated now, and his professional mask slips a little, probably because he's used to homeless veterans who take whatever money gets offered and disappear. Elliot maintains his calm lawyer voice while refusing to budge on our core demands, and I'm grateful he's not backing down just to make this easier. My phone buzzes during a bathroom break, and I see a message from the aide asking if we can talk separately from the mediation. She proposes a small private ceremony in a hospital conference room, with no press and no public spectacle where they'd acknowledge what happened. Her tone in the message suggests she gets why I turned down the governor's earlier offer, and she's trying to find something that gives me control instead of turning me into a photo opportunity. I text back that I'll think about it if the bigger accountability stuff falls into place first, because I don't want to give anyone closure before the actual work of reform happens. The mediation drags on for another 2 hours before we reach a tentative agreement to keep talking if the company accepts our training mandate and agrees to a narrower NDA. Elliot explains this version would let me tell my story while protecting specific internal documents that aren't really relevant to the public anyway. He says this is about as good as we'll get without going to court, which could take years and cost resources better spent on other cases. I agree to continue negotiations while keeping our leverage, understanding that perfect justice isn't something I'm going to get, but meaningful change might actually be possible. 2 weeks pass with back-and-forth emails and phone calls before Elliot contacts me with personnel news. He tells me Kevin has been suspended while they finish their internal review, and Dexter resigned instead of facing potential termination. I have mixed feelings about this outcome because Kevin's suspension might only be temporary, and Dexter gets to leave on his own terms like it was his choice. But there's space now where they used to be, room for me to exist, without constantly looking over my shoulder for the men who hurt me, and that counts for something, even if it's not everything I wanted from this process. The revised policy draft shows up in my email inbox on a Tuesday morning, and I spend an hour reading through pages of new protocols. The appearance-based loiterer checklist is completely gone, and there are new requirements about trauma-informed approaches when security interacts with veterans. Elliot calls me that afternoon and walks me through the specific language changes, pointing out where we won concessions and where the company kept some wiggle room for themselves. It's not perfect, and I can see places where they might find ways around the rules, but it's way better than what existed before. These are real rules that might actually protect the next homeless veteran who shows up somewhere they have every right to be. The public apology language takes several more days of negotiation with the company, fighting against anything that sounds like admitting they did something wrong. I keep pushing for clear acknowledgement of what actually happened instead of vague corporate speak about unfortunate situations. We go back and forth through Elliot until we finally land on a statement that will be read at a veterans stakeholders meeting. The statement names the assault clearly and commits to policy reform without the legal liability language the company's lawyers are so worried about. Elliot tells me this is a genuine win considering how hard companies usually fight against any public accountability, and I decide to believe him because I need to trust someone knows what they're doing. 4 weeks into mediation, the settlement documents arrive in my email as a PDF attachment that takes 3 tries to download on my phone because the file is huge with all the legal language. I spend the morning in a coffee shop reading through every page twice, my finger scrolling slowly as I check each clause against what Elliot explained we'd agreed to. The financial damages section lists specific amounts for medical costs, lost wages from missing the ceremony, and general damages for the assault itself, numbers that feel both larger than I expected and smaller than what actually happened deserves. The training program funding is spelled out in detail, with requirements for trauma-informed approaches and veteran sensitivity modules that have to be completed within 6 months. The NDA section is narrower than their first offer, protecting internal company documents and employee names, but specifically allowing me to tell my own story and discuss the policy changes publicly. I read that part 4 times to make sure I understand what I can and cannot say before I feel comfortable with it. Elliot calls while I'm on the last page and walks me through the signature process, explaining I'll use an electronic signature platform that creates a legally binding agreement. I click through the screens and type my name in the designated box, watching it convert to a formal signature, and then I hit submit before I can second-guess myself. The confirmation email arrives immediately, with copies of the signed documents attached, and I forward them to my own email 3 times to make sure I have backups. Relief washes over me, but it's mixed with something bitter, because this feels like the best outcome I could get, but not actual justice for what happened to me. Elliot sends a congratulations message saying we achieved meaningful accountability and policy reform, which is more than most cases get. And I believe him, but I also know the company is still operating, and Kevin might be back at work eventually, and the system that allowed this still exists. I save all the documents to a folder on my phone labeled settlement and close my email, feeling like I've crossed a finish line that doesn't quite feel like winning. Nathaniel calls 2 days after I sign the settlement with news that sounds too good to be real, telling me my housing voucher application got approved, and he found me a space in a veteran housing building across town. He gives me the address, and I take the bus there that same afternoon, my knee aching from the steps, but my hands steadier than usual with anticipation. The building is old, but well-maintained, with a security door that actually works, and a lobby that smells like cleaning products instead of urine. Nathaniel meets me in the hallway and walks me to a second-floor unit, unlocking the door to show me a single room with a bathroom attached and a kitchenette along one wall. The space is maybe 200 square feet total, but it has a window that opens and a door that locks from the inside, and a bathroom I won't have to share with anyone. Nathaniel explains the short-term lease is good for 6 months, with options to extend if I keep up with the program requirements, which means staying in touch with my VA caseworker and maintaining my therapy appointments. I walk around the small space, touching the walls and opening cabinets, checking that everything is real and not some dream I'll wake up from back in the shelter. The previous tenant left a small table and chair that Nathaniel says I can keep, and there's a narrow closet just big enough for my few belongings. I sign the lease paperwork right there in the empty apartment, my hands shaking less than they did when I signed the settlement, and Nathaniel hands me 2 keys on a simple ring. He leaves after showing me how the building's laundry room works and where to find the maintenance office, and I sit on the floor of my new space for an hour, just existing in a place that's mine. The gratitude feels fragile, like if I acknowledge it too much it might disappear, so I keep my expectations low and remind myself this is temporary, even while hoping it might last. Therapy with Nadia settles into a weekly routine where I show up every Thursday afternoon and we work through the same patterns of trauma response that keep cycling through my body. She teaches me grounding techniques that involve focusing on physical sensations in the present moment instead of getting pulled into memories of the Humvee fire or Kevin's hand on my throat. I practice the exercises she demonstrates, pressing my feet into the floor and naming 5 things I can see in the room, and sometimes it actually helps pull me back when my brain starts spiraling. The tremors in my hands persist, no matter what we try. To Nadia explains they might be permanent damage from the combination of combat trauma and physical injuries. I'm sleeping slightly better now that I have my own space, maybe 5 hours most nights instead of 3, though I still wake up gasping from dreams where I'm pulling burning men from wreckage. She asks me to track my sleep patterns and anxiety levels in a notebook, and I do it even though writing with shaking hands is frustrating. We talk about the settlement and what it means to accept partial accountability instead of full justice, and she helps me process the anger that comes with knowing Kevin might face minimal consequences. The breathing exercises she taught me work about half the time when I start feeling my chest tighten, which is better than the 0% success rate I had before therapy. I leave each session feeling slightly more equipped to manage symptoms I'd accepted as just permanent parts of who I am now, and that small shift feels significant, even when the tremors continue and the nightmares persist. Sam contacts me 3 weeks after the settlement finalizes, asking if I'm willing to do a brief interview for her final follow-up article about the outcome. We meet at the same coffee shop where I read the settlement documents, and she asks careful questions about what I hope the policy changes will accomplish for other veterans. I keep my answers measured and forward-looking, talking about trauma-informed training and appearance-based profiling reforms, without dwelling on my personal anger about criminal charges not happening. She takes notes and asks if I'm disappointed with the outcome, and I tell her honestly that I wanted more, but I'm glad there's documented accountability and real policy changes. The article publishes 2 days later with a straightforward headline about settlement and reforms, laying out the specific training requirements and policy revisions without sensationalizing the story. She includes a short quote from me about hoping this prevents the next homeless veteran from being assaulted at an event they're supposed to attend, and she notes that no criminal charges were filed despite documented evidence of assault. The comments section gets maybe a third of the engagement her earlier articles received, which makes sense because resolution stories never generate the same interest as initial outrage. I read through the article twice and feel satisfied that the public record is complete now, that anyone searching for information about this incident will find documented evidence of what happened and what changed because of it. Sam emails me a final thank you for trusting her with my story and says she's moving on to other investigations, and I appreciate that she's not trying to maintain some ongoing relationship when the professional need has ended. The article gets archived in my settlement folder alongside all the other documentation, another piece of evidence that this actually happened and wasn't just something I imagined or exaggerated. The veteran stakeholders meeting happens on a cold Tuesday morning in a government building conference room that smells like burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I arrive early and find a seat in the back row, watching about 30 people filter in from various advocacy organizations and veteran service groups. The corporate representative shows up exactly on time, wearing an expensive suit that probably costs more than 3 months of my rent, and he stands at the front of the room with a printed statement in his hands. He reads the agreed-upon apology in a flat, monotone voice that makes it clear he'd rather be literally anywhere else, acknowledging that their security staff assaulted me and announcing the new policy reforms. His delivery is so corporate and emotionless that several attendees shift uncomfortably in their seats, and I see one older veteran in the front row shake his head in disgust. Some people in the room bristle visibly at the careful legal language that avoids saying anything that might increase liability, while others nod with the tired recognition of people who've attended too many of these performative accountability sessions. The representative finishes reading and immediately says he has to leave for another meeting, not taking any questions or engaging with the people who traveled here to witness this moment. A facilitator from the State Veterans Affairs Office takes over and opens the floor for discussion, and several advocates stand up to express skepticism about whether the policy changes will actually be implemented or just exist on paper. I don't speak because I've already said everything I need to say through the settlement process, but I stay for the full 2-hour meeting, listening to other veterans share their own experiences with security profiling and discrimination. The meeting ends without any dramatic moments or breakthroughs, just the grinding work of institutional accountability that looks imperfect and incomplete, but at least exists in documented form. I leave feeling like I witnessed something important, even if it wasn't satisfying, another piece of the public record that confirms this happened and changes were made. The private acknowledgement ceremony happens the following week in a small hospital conference room that the aide arranged after I declined the governor's public photo op offer. I show up wearing clean clothes from the thrift store and my new VA identification card in my wallet, my knee still aching but manageable with the pain medication my doctor prescribed. The aide is there along with a state official I don't recognize who introduces himself as the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs. There are no cameras or reporters or crowds, just 3 people in a quiet room with fluorescent lighting and a view of the parking lot. The official thanks me briefly for my service and for my patience during the resolution process, his words feeling genuine, even though they're probably something he's said dozens of times before. He hands me a replacement copy of the ceremony invitation that's been printed on new cardstock and a formal letter from the governor's office acknowledging my Medal of Honor and apologizing for the disruption of the original ceremony. I accept both documents and shake his hand, and the whole interaction takes maybe 5 minutes before he excuses himself for another appointment. The aide stays behind and asks how I'm doing with genuine concern in her voice, and I tell her honestly that I'm managing, and I appreciate her help navigating the bureaucracy. She gives me her direct phone number again, and says to call if I ever need anything related to veteran services or state benefits, and I pocket the card, knowing I probably won't use it, but grateful for the offer. I leave through the hospital's side entrance with the documents in a folder under my arm, feeling like I've closed a loop that was left open when everything went wrong at the original ceremony. It's not the public recognition on stage with dignitaries and families watching, but it's an acknowledgement that happened on my terms, without cameras turning my trauma into a redemption story, and that matters more than I expected it would. My new VA identification card arrives in the mail on a Thursday afternoon, and I carry it in my wallet next to a small plastic bag containing the broken pieces of my old card that Kevin snapped in half. The new card is crisp and unbent with my photo and information printed clearly, official proof that I'm who I say I am and I have the right to access veteran services. I keep the broken card pieces because they remind me of what people see first when they look at me, the assumptions they make about homeless veterans being fakes or threats or problems to be removed. The broken card is physical evidence of how easily my identity and dignity can be destroyed by someone who decides I don't belong, and I need that reminder to stay alert. When I need to prove who I am at the VA clinic or when applying for services, I pull out the new card and show it with hands that still shake, but less than they used to. But when I'm alone in my apartment organizing my documents, I take out the broken pieces and look at them, remembering that afternoon when Kevin ground my invitation into the floor and Dexter snapped my card in half while a crowd watched. The broken card is what I remember when I need to understand why fighting for accountability mattered, even when the outcome was imperfect, why documenting what happened and forcing policy changes was worth the months of mediation and compromise. Both cards stay in my wallet as different kinds of proof, one showing who I am now and one showing what was done to me, and I need both truths to make sense of everything that happened. Kevin's formal apology letter arrives through legal channels 2 months after the settlement, forwarded by Elliot with a note saying, "I'm under no obligation to respond." The letter is carefully worded by lawyers to express regret for his actions, while avoiding any language that might create additional liability for him or his employer. He says he's sorry for the pain he caused and acknowledges that his grief over his brother's death doesn't excuse how he treated me, phrases that sound rehearsed and legally vetted. I read the letter once while standing in my apartment kitchen, feeling nothing except a distant recognition that this is what closure is supposed to look like in our legal system. There's no catharsis waiting in these words, no moment where I suddenly feel better about being choked and humiliated in front of a crowd. Kevin is a man who let his grief turn him cruel and violent, and I'm someone who survived that cruelty and forced some measure of accountability, and that's the entire story between us. I file the letter away in my settlement folder without responding, because there's nothing I need to say to him, and no exchange of words that would change what happened. His apology exists as part of the legal record now, another document proving this incident occurred, and some consequences followed, but it doesn't heal anything or make me feel vindicated. I close the folder and put it back in my closet, done with Kevin in every way that matters, even though I'll probably carry the memory of his hand on my throat for the rest of my life. I email Abigail a brief thank you for her witness statement and her willingness to see past her own grief to recognize mine, keeping the message short and straightforward. She responds within a few hours with equal brevity, saying she hopes I'm doing better and that she's working on her own assumptions about who deserves to be at military ceremonies. Her message acknowledges that watching what happened to me forced her to examine how she's been carrying her son's death as suspicion toward anyone who seemed out of place at veteran events. I appreciate her honesty, without needing to build any kind of ongoing relationship from it, and I tell her I'm glad she's doing that work. We don't exchange phone numbers or make plans to stay in touch, just two people who intersected briefly at a painful moment and managed to treat each other with basic human decency afterward. Her witness statement was important for the case, and her willingness to examine her own biases matters for other veterans who might encounter her at future events, but we don't owe each other anything beyond that. I close the email exchange feeling like we've both done what needed to be done, neither of us trying to force connection or meaning beyond what naturally exists. Sometimes people come into your life for a specific purpose and then move on, and that's exactly what this is. The security company's training program begins rolling out according to the settlement timeline, and Elliot forwards me an invitation to consult on the curriculum development. The email is professionally worded and offers compensation for my time, but I read it twice and realize they're asking me to do more emotional labor for the institution that harmed me. I politely decline and suggest they bring in established veterans organizations with expertise in trauma-informed training instead of putting that burden on me personally. Elliot calls after I send my response and says, that's a healthy boundary, that I've already done the work of forcing accountability, and I don't owe them anything beyond what the settlement requires. He passes my suggestion along to their training coordinator, and they end up contracting with a national veterans advocacy group that has professional curriculum developers. I feel good about knowing when to step back rather than taking on every fight, understanding that my role was forcing the policy changes to happen, but not necessarily implementing every detail myself. The training program will reach hundreds of security staff across their company locations, and my involvement in creating it would have been one more way for them to use my trauma for their benefit. Setting that boundary feels like another small victory, proof that I'm learning to protect my own well-being instead of sacrificing it for every worthy cause that comes along. I move into the SRO on a Tuesday afternoon and spend the first hour just organizing my medications into the small lockbox Nathaniel helped me get from the VA pharmacy. I line up the bottles in rows by time of day, morning meds on the left and evening ones on the right, creating a system that helps my shaking hands know exactly where to reach. The calendar app on my phone fills up with reminders for therapy appointments and VA check-ins, little alerts that ping throughout the week to keep me grounded in a schedule. I designate one corner of the room near the window for my important documents, the settlement papers and new VA card and housing voucher, all filed in a manila folder that sits on top of my small dresser. The space is mine, and some mornings I wake up surprised it's still here, that the key still works in the lock, and no one has told me I need to leave. I'm learning to trust that stability doesn't have to be temporary, even though every experience I've had for 3 years taught me otherwise. Some days are harder than others when my knee aches bad or the tremors get worse and I want to just stay in bed, but I'm building routines that add up to something more than just surviving each day. Nathaniel calls me 6 weeks after I move in and asks if I'd be interested in volunteering at the VA clinic one afternoon a week, helping other veterans with the ID replacement process. He explains they need someone who understands how overwhelming the paperwork feels when you're barely holding yourself together, someone who can walk people through the steps with patience. I agree immediately because I remember sitting in that same clinic trying to figure out which forms I needed while my hands shook too badly to write clearly. The first afternoon, I help an older veteran named Rod, who lost his wallet 3 months ago and hasn't been able to access any VA services since then. I show him exactly which documents he needs and explain the timeline for getting his new card, my voice steady even though my hands aren't. I'm good at this work because I know what it feels like to be on the other side of the desk, drowning in bureaucracy, and I can offer the patient guidance I desperately needed back then. Each week I meet new people struggling with the same systems that almost broke me, and there's purpose in being able to help them navigate it. I walk past the ceremony venue one afternoon on my way to therapy and pause on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the marble steps where Kevin first grabbed my arm 7 months ago. I don't go inside because I don't need to reclaim that specific space or prove anything to myself about being able to enter that building, but I'm not afraid of it anymore either. Not the way I was for months after, when just seeing the building from a distance made my chest tight. I pull out my phone and text the aide a simple update, found housing and working on it, keeping her in the loop like she asked me to do. She responds within a minute with a thumbs-up emoji, and I keep walking toward the clinic, my knee still aching but manageable with the physical therapy exercises I do every morning. My hands shake as I put the phone back in my pocket, but they're steady enough to get through the day, steady enough to help other veterans with their paperwork and make it to my appointments on time. I'm moving forward into whatever comes next, with the knowledge that I survived the worst of what happened and built something better from it, one small routine and one afternoon of volunteering at a time. That's how it went down for me, but I already know you've got thoughts. Drop them in the comments because half the fun here is hearing what everyone else would have done. I'll be scrolling through later, so don't hold back.